Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this very special event. I'm Ollie Ratcliffe, I'm the President of Reading University Students' Union, and I'm very proud to co-chair this debate with Sir David Bell, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Reading. So, it is worth starting with 2 points. So, first of all, we fully support the national campaign Generation Vote, which is the campaign about ensuring that students are registered and are able to vote on the 23rd of June. So I urge everyone to support the campaign as much as you can and register if you haven't already. Secondly, the University of Reading and the Students' Union as institutions are taking strictly neutral stances on the debate. Universities are places of debate, discussion and analysis, and academic freedom and freedom of speech are enshrined in our constitutions. So moving forward, so it's not for us to presume that we speak for every student that goes to university. What we're here to do tonight is to offer an informed debate, offering both sides, and making sure you guys make sense of the statistics and the arguments that are bombarded your way, especially in the next month. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two excellent speakers that we have here tonight. So starting with Eddie Izzard. So Eddie Izzard has been hailed as one of the most foremost stand-ups of his generation, and performs his shows in French, German, and Spanish. He is also known as an actor, a charity fundraiser, a political activist, and now as a proud British European, he is fighting to remain in Europe, visiting 31 cities in 31 days in a bid to get young people to register for the referendum and vote to stay in Europe. Moving on to Daniel Hannan. Daniel Hannan is the MEP for the South East of England. He's also a journalist and an author. He advocates localism and has written several books, such as How We Invented Freedom, Why Vote Leave, arguing for democratic reform. He loves Europe, but believes the EU is making its people poorer, less democratic, and less free. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our panelists. So before we start tonight's exciting event, I'd like to note that we are both filming and live streaming in full. So please make yourself known to us if you have any questions on this. And please note if you do ask a question, you will obviously be on film as well, and it will be online. So without further ado, Eddie, the floor is yours.
Okie dokie. Thank you for being here. This is my first debate. Dan just said this is not actually a debate, is it? Because it would be more combative. But the question and answers might get debated. But I haven't done one of these before, so sometimes I'll get a bit woolly in this and that and the other. But anyway, and I'm sure Daniel will be very good. But this is great. This is democracy in action, which is kind of fun, because people fought and died for the vote. So above all, in these 31 days when I'm going around the UK, I want people to register. So I'm going to quick check. Who's registered in here? And I guess you probably... Okay, who's not registered? Put it that way. Anyone at the top? Okay, so you're all registered. Right, so if I say register, you're here, we have. Well done to you. And I know there's an argument that more older people are registered and they tend to be more likely to leave, and younger people want to stay, so I would be encouraging people to register. But above all, I do think if you look down, as a student of the history of humanity, if you look down the centuries, people have fought and died to get this thing. You people understand it. If you're young people, you will have other young friends, and if you are older people, you might have kids or whatever. Please get them to register. It's the 7th year. It's 2 weeks today. 2 weeks today. I think it's a great thing if we get people registered just to use the Democratic. Even if they're voting leave, even if they want to leave, get them to register so that they can make that vote. Tell them the wrong date for the actual referendum. But still, they should have that. No, tell them the right date. No, it's good, but I do think this is great. I mean, people, this is what the Arab Spring uprisings were about, people wanting to have democracy. It's not a perfect thing, but it's the best thing we've got. So let's go for it. I don't believe in a God. I think it's up to us. I believe in humanity. I believe in us. I don't believe in a guy upstairs because he never seems to come down and help. I noticed during all the wars, because this is a thing in Europe, from Alexander the Great to World War II, 2,500 years, where we made beautiful things. In Europe, we did stuff, we made this, look, I've made that and that. Oh, Leonardo, you want a good painting, mate, eh? All this, that. And then every 50 years, we'd say, whoa, we haven't killed anyone. Let's kill the people with the blue hats. Let's kill the people with the green hats. And we just did murder all the way up to the World War II. And then the European Union came out of that, the idea that we should never do that again. So that is the starting point of it. I think that gets lost. I think a lot of young people say, well, I don't know. Because from the outside, a lot of very good arguments will come through with good points and things. And then from the inside, a lot of very good arguments, good points. So we all put these arguments in. And a lot of young people are going, I can see all these arguments. But I sort of go above that. And I say, I'm trying to head towards a world where everyone has a fair chance. Where everyone in the world has a fair chance. And we can't do that tomorrow. We can't say tomorrow everyone has a fair chance. Everyone has a chance to bring their kids up, has democracy, the chance to lead a decent life. But surely we're heading in that direction. And if we're doing that, then the continents have got to start doing that. Everyone having a fair chance in each continent. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're the only continent to ever try to do this. This is not the same as the United States of America. This is a different thing. 2,500 years of bloody war. And then we said, enough is enough. Let's try and make this work. So that's my starting point. I want to tell you why I became someone who started talking about Europe. I was positive before. A lot of young people are like, yeah, I'm positive. Live and let live. Why not? But I went on a holiday on a Greek island when I was in my 20s, late 20s. And it was one of those ones with the volcanic island, and you go out in the ship into the waters, and the captain said, at one point, we didn't realize this was going to happen. He said, look, it's warm waters out here. You can dive overboard and swim about if you want. And I remember everyone going, really? You could just, it was quite a big ship, just jump overboard, and that's a bit weird. But it looked fun, and it wasn't that, it was like jumping off here into the water, and we go, okay. And then people started diving overboard, and they were swimming around in the water. Okay, and then people started shouting at each other. And they're shouting in French and in German and Spanish. Hola, hey, Giuseppe, yeah, Hans. And I thought, this is really fun. This is nice. This is beautiful. This is young Europe right here, right now. And I knew, because I knew the history, if we went back to the 30s, we're just about to go to war. All those people would be doing the same thing, having fun. There must have been a holiday there back in the late 30s where all the same things and different accents and everyone shouting. And then just a short time later, we're all picking up guns and going off and doing murder. And we weren't doing that. So I thought this was worth fighting for. What I felt right there, that was worth fighting for. And not fighting where to pick up the gun, but fighting activist, positive, put forward the argument right there and then. That's when I became a British European. I consider myself a British European. And I know not everyone works in that way, but there are African Americans, Italian Americans, Asian Americans. I'm proud to be British. I'm proud to be European. That's how I see it. I have a positive vision for the future. If young people want a positive vision for the future, I feel I have it, and I am living it. I'm a transgender guy that walked out the door 31 years ago. I try and be brave. I'm a fighter. I go out there, but I fight the good fight rather than the one which we did for 2,500 years. So right there and then, on that Greek island, I just thought, this is beautiful. And then I didn't know what I could do. What can I do? So it just was sitting in my brain. And then my career, I was street performing. Then I became a stand-up comedian. It started taking off, and gigs started happening in Paris. And the guy said, come over and perform to the English in Paris. Well, the English speakers, 200,000 English speakers in Paris. I didn't know. Get that, someone. And that's someone calling from Paris right now to say, yes, it's true. There's 200,000 there, and there's a whole bunch of French people over in London, and so they said, do shows in English. And when I was over there doing shows in Paris in English, and I thought, this is it, I've got to do this in French. So that was 19 years ago. I got on the stage doing the show in France. Last year, I toured to over 5,200 people in the French language, 11 French cities. It's 200 years since the Battle of Waterloo. If you don't think that's a beautiful thing, I do. I think that is fantastic, even though it's about myself. That's just a positive way of taking my business, the comedy that I've developed here in Britain, and I took it to France, and I didn't get any work papers to go over there. I just went straight over there as part of the European Union. So no work permits. And when I was doing my holiday back in Greece, I didn't have to get a visa going there. I had low-cost flights going there. The roaming charges were still high back then, but I don't know if you know this. Roaming charges next year are going to be zero. The extra roaming charges are cutting down to zero because of the European Union. So from young people's point of view, you've got your low-cost flights, which are going to cut down the number of flights. The chief executive of EasyJet was saying that today. The flights costs are going to go up. Your roaming charges are going to go up. And the European health insurance card, the EHIC card, that's going to disappear if we come out of Europe. It's an opportunity there. I want young people to have the same opportunities that I had. And I had them right there. And everyone can have them. But if we go away, then that's just going to disappear. We're going to have to come up with all new regulations and rules. So, and so from a humanity point of view, and from an opportunity point of view, I just think it is the right thing to do. Is it difficult? Is it perfect? No. But if we want to change it, we've got to be inside it. Let's stand and fight for our place in Europe rather than running and hiding from Europe. Because we're British people. We don't run and hide. So that is one thing. So on the economy, if you're talking about your pound in your pocket, we are net contributors into the European Union, but we get out more of it than we put in. It's estimated up to £4,300 per family. Now, on the outside, they'll come up with other figures. It's difficult to work things out, but this is how we feel. So these are the arguments. You're going to have to decide for yourself what you feel. But the head of the Bank of England, the governor of the Bank of England, does say we will go into recession if we come out. The World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund says we will have a really bad time if we come out. The head of the Confederation of British Industry, the CBI, says that we will have really struggle in our country if we come out. So everyone, Barack Obama, President of America, he said don't pull out. Hillary Clinton said don't pull out. Donald Trump said why don't you go and live on the moon? So, well, we're not really listening to Donald Trump because he seems a bit bonkers. So the economic arguments are there. It seems to have changed. The people on the Leave Department are saying, well, they're not even arguing about the economic argument anymore. It seems like a bad idea. Economically, the pound in your pocket, traveling across Europe, going there, your health care, your roaming charges, all that is going to change if we come out. And also, young people, you're going to live a long, long life. Why stop it right now? The Queen is 90. You could live to 100. Healthcare is going to be even better by then. You could live a long, long life, and you won't be able to do these things in Europe. So I just think it is right there. Security. Theresa May, who has been a Eurosceptic, but she said, as regards security and protection against crime, protection against terrorism, it is in the interest of our country to stay inside the European Union. And that's from someone who is on the Remain side now, but she has been a Eurosceptic a lot of her life. So security from the economic point of view, but above all, humanity. I just think this is the right thing to do. It's what we do as human beings. I don't think we were put on earth for any specific reason, but I think we're here. I believe in humanity, and I think we should all try to make this work. If we can't make it work, what future is there for the world? We've got to be trying to get in there and make it better. It's a difficult thing. It's a tough thing. I'm doing my damnedest to try and make it better, and if you give a damn about humanity, stand up and fight for our place in Europe. Let's not leave. Let vote Remain. Thank you.
Felicitación. Enhorabuena.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Daniel, if you'd like to take to the floor.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to start in exactly the place that Eddie started, with democracy. The beautiful fact that we get to determine who makes our laws, which is geographically or historically pretty unusual, right? We're very lucky to be living in a place where that's taken for granted. And in fact, one of the arguments that I'm going to be making is that taking power back from Brussels will mean restoring honor and purpose to the act of voting. I think if you ask any politician of any party, if they're being honest, what's the most common reaction you get on the doorstep? It's, oh, it doesn't make any difference. Nothing changes, right? I've stopped voting because nothing changes. I don't want to get power back from the EU and then leave it festering in Whitehall. The whole purpose of getting it back is to push it downwards and outwards to local government, or better yet, to individual citizens, to take decisions more closely to the people that they affect. The whole basis of my argument is democracy, but I am not going to be part of that democracy, because I am inviting you on the 23rd of June to fire me, to make me redundant from a very comfortable, very well-remunerated job with large tax-free expenses. Everything you've read about those Eurocrats' expenses and those MEP gourmandizing, Michelin-starred lifestyles, absolutely right. In fact, double it, right? So I would not be doing that. I would not be asking you to serve me with my P45 if I were not confident that the economy as a whole will do better outside the European Union. And therefore, incidentally, there will be plenty of openings for newly unemployed MEPs to do something more productive than legislate in Brussels. Now, why do I think that? Why do I think that we will be better off out, not just democratically, but in the literal financial sense? Well, let's take it as read that it's not because I'm against cooperating with Europe, right? I mean, like Eddie, I speak a couple of other languages. I speak French, I speak Spanish. I've lived and worked all over the continent. I've got no problem, and I don't know anyone who has a problem, with the idea of neighboring countries getting together and arbitrating their disputes peacefully and achieving collectively what they can't do singly. Okay? You'd have to be mad to be against that. If the European Union was simply an intergovernmental forum, if it was simply a club of nations working together, like the Commonwealth or the IMF or NATO or the G7 or whatever, right, we wouldn't be having this debate now, we wouldn't be having this referendum because nobody would object to it. The problem is that the European Union has become remote, self-serving, corrupt, cut off from the people it purports to speak for. And can we take one other thing for granted? We're all in favor of peace in Europe. I mean, I kind of hope that doesn't need saying. But I feel in this debate that it is just worth putting on the record out there. Nobody wants to start the First World War again. Right? But just ask yourselves one question when we look at the history of the European Union. Does it make more sense to see the EU as a cause of peace in Europe? Or doesn't it make more sense to see it as a consequence of a European peace that was based on the defeat of fascism, the spread of democracy, and to a lesser extent, the NATO alliance? Well, let me put that a different way. Look at the way in which European integration is being pursued now. The two pillars on which it rests are the euro and the Schengen zone. Jean-Claude Juncker, with that peculiar imperviousness to reality that characterizes his cast, says that they are the two greatest achievements of the European Union, the euro and the Schengen zone. It makes you wonder what the bad things are if those are the two greatest achievements. Would you say that jamming these countries together in monetary policy and in migration policy is soothing or stoking national antagonisms? Look at the way Greek newspapers write about Germany now. Look at the way German newspapers write about Greece. Would you say that forcing these countries into these large, non-democratic blocs makes them get on better or worse? Shall I tell you a funny thing? Democracy around the world tends to generate peaceful relations. When countries get to a level of advanced development, democratic norms, they stop, or they become much less likely to arbitrate their disputes by force. In my native South America, discarding one or two tiny kind of border skirmishes, there hasn't been a major interstate war since 1941, and they're outside the European Union. North America hasn't seen a conflict since 1865, and they're outside the European Union. Switzerland hasn't seen conflict since 1848 or an interstate war since 1815, and it's outside the European Union, and by the way, doing pretty well. So why do I think that Britain would be better off living under its own laws, trading and cooperating with its friends in Europe, but governing itself? Well, if I had to put it in one sentence, it would be this. The European Union is obsolete. It's a hangover from an earlier age. a relic of the 1950s, a time when freight costs were high, refrigeration was expensive, and regional blocks looked like the future. But my friends, that world has been left redundant by technological advance. In an age of the internet and cheap flights and Skype, geographical proximity has never mattered less. It's as easy for a firm here in my constituency to do business with one in Ljubljana in India as with one in Ljubljana, Slovenia. In fact, it's easier. The Indian company will be English-speaking. It will use the common law. If there's a dispute between the two parties, it'll be arbitrated in a way that they both recognize. It'll have the same accountancy models, the same unwritten business etiquette. None of these things is true of the Slovene company, despite years of single market regulation. Back in 1975, during the last referendum, it looked as though Europe was the coming idea. Britain was in a bad place. We had the 3-day week and prices and incomes policies. We were the sick man of Europe. We looked across the channel. We thought, these guys are doing something right. Does anyone feel that way today? Looking across the channel and seeing the convulsions of the twin euro and migration crises. I fear I interrupt someone. No? Carry on, sir, carry on. You're the important one. It's always about the media on these occasions. So, just here's the basic statistics. The year that we joined, 1973, the EU, the 28 countries that now make up the EU, were 36% of the world economy. 1980, it was still 30%. Today, it's 17%. Actually, I say today it's 17%. 17% at the beginning of this year. It's probably less than that by now because it's tumbling virtually by the minute. Over the last 10 years, China's economy has doubled in size. India's economy has doubled in size. Ethiopia's economy has doubled in size. But the Eurozone, incredibly, is the same size now as it was in 2006. Now, I've got to tell you, my friends, this is no place for a country like ours. You know, we're a trading country, a merchant country. We don't sit on great natural resources in this green, damp, exquisite island of ours. We have to make our way in the world by what we buy and sell. That means we have to be where the customers are. And it's increasingly obvious that the customers are not going to be in Europe. The world that you guys are graduating into is not the same as the one that I or Eddie did. Europe is no longer at the center of things, except on those two-dimensional maps where it's given an artificial centrality by the way in which the map is drawn up. And I think that affects, bizarrely, our view of how the world is. Over the last 10 years, every continent on this planet has experienced significant economic growth, except Antarctica and Europe. Actually, I made this point the other day, and a Spanish friend sent me a furious email with reams of statistics, and I had to accept as I read down his list of figures that I got it completely wrong. He was right. It turns out Antarctica is actually doing fine. The main economic activity in Antarctica is cruise ships, and they're booming. So actually, we are trapped in the world's only shrinking trade bloc. And we're paying for the privilege of belonging to a customs union that isn't growing. £19 billion gross, £11 billion net. Now, there's always a row about the numbers. Okay, the Leave side quotes the gross figure, and then the Remain side says, oh yeah, but some of that money is rebated and some of it's spent here. Absolutely true. But first of all, I think it's perfectly legitimate to quote the gross figure because that's what we normally do in politics, right? If I say to you, how much do you pay in council tax, I'm guessing you'll tell me what you actually pay. You don't say, well, I have to deduct what they take off on the value of the street lighting and the value of the bin collection. Right? If I say to you, what's basic rate income tax, would you say, well, it's 20p in the pound, or would you say, well, actually, if you think about it, it's zero, because it's all given back in roads and schools and hospitals. So I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing to count the gross figure, rather than pretending that all the money spent by the EU is spent on things we'd have chosen for ourselves. In fact, it's very often spent on purchasing the loyalty of powerful and articulate interest groups. But even if you want to take the net figure, we're talking about what the French would call an important sum of money, Eddie. Right? And let me put it in context like this. During the last parliament, during the coalition government, 2010 to 2015, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, across the whole of government spending, the austerity programme saved £36 billion. During that same 5-year period, our gross contribution to the EU budget was £85 billion. Our net contribution was £42 billion. So even if we insist on taking the net figure, that one clean excision would have wiped out the entire domestic cuts programme across the whole of government spending and still have given us enough left over to take a penny off income tax. But you know what I think is higher than the straight financial cost of membership is the democratic cost. We fought a civil war in this country to establish the principle that laws should not be passed, nor taxes raised, except by our own elected representatives. And now, who is it who has a monopoly of the right to propose legislation in Brussels? 28 unelected European commissioners who are not just, it's not just undemocratic, it's actually anti-democratic. We've uniquely contrived a system where you generally have to have lost an election to get appointed. So it's only when, like Chris Patten or Neil Kinnock or Peter Mandels, or indeed now Jean-Claude Juncker, who just lost the election in Luxembourg, it's only when you have been expressly rejected by your voters that you are invited to come and legislate for them. And my friends, if we were run that way, if Britain were administered by 28 unelected British commissioners, who, as a result of being invulnerable to the ballot box, immune to public opinion, had come out with such spectacular disasters as the euro, the CAP, the common fisheries policy, the overregulation of small business, the Schengen catastrophe, I'd be against that. I hope all of you would be against that. Right? It wouldn't make you anti-British. It wouldn't make you Anglo-skeptics. It would make you Democrats. One more thought. On the 23rd of June, there isn't going to be a status quo option on the ballot paper. We face a fork in the road. One path leads to a relationship with the European Union based on a common market, not a common government. Such a relationship as is enjoyed by every other geographically European state that is not an EU member. Okay? There is a pan-European free trade area that stretches from non-EU Iceland to non-EU Turkey. Throughout that zone, you will not encounter any tariffs. Right? Every non-EU country, except one, Monaco, the Isle of Man, Montenegro, Macedonia, Switzerland, any of them, they all enjoy unlimited access to the EU market. The only exception is Belarus, which chose instead to form a customs union with Russia. Now, I've never heard anyone in Brussels suggest that if Britain were to leave the political structures of the EU, that we would somehow be excluding ourselves from that free trade area. Never heard anyone suggest such a preposterous idea. So that's one option. Free market, not political assimilation. But the other option is not staying where we are. The other option is acquiescing in the further political, military, fiscal integration that is coming. Now, some of you will think, okay, I'm happy to do that. I'm guessing Eddie would happily put himself in that category. He's always said he's a British European. He's happy for the European Union to become more of a political entity. Right? And if that's your view, perfectly legitimate. You can vote Remain with a very clear conscience. But don't imagine that you can somehow cast a qualified Remain vote. Right? Remain doesn't mean staying where we are. Voting to stay in doesn't mean voting to stay put. Voting to stay in means implicitly acquiescing in everything that is coming our way. The idea that I could go back as an MEP and then start objecting to things, people would just laugh, right? As I say, there is no qualified Remain vote. Every ballot to stay in will be taken in Brussels as a warm round of applause. Carry on, guys, you're doing a brilliant job. Keep at it. And that's the choice we face. Are we going to be an independent country, interested and involved with the affairs of every continent, including Europe, but ultimately living under our own laws, defending that precious democratic right that, as Eddie correctly says, previous generations have fought for? Or are we going to hand more and more power to people whom nobody elects? Two roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. We are just setting out, if we leave the EU, on a journey that will lead to our prosperity, our self-government, and our self-belief. Extraordinary idea that we couldn't make a success of things as an independent country. If we can't, who can? We're the 5th largest economy in the world. We're the 4th largest military budget in the world. We are one of 5 permanent seat holders at the UN Security Council. We're one of the leading members of G20, G7, Commonwealth. We have unparalleled links to other English-speaking countries. We are connected by language and law, by habit and history, and by kinship and custom to every other continent and archipelago. How much bigger do we have to be before we're able to flourish under our own laws? Edmund Burke said that a nation is a partnership between the people who have died, the people who are alive, and the people who have yet to be born. I had some funny news not long ago. Shortly after polling day, my wife and I are expecting our 3rd child. This is 11 years after our last child, so this was a pleasant and unlooked for but delightful surprise. One of the many things that I want for that child is to grow up as a citizen of an independent country where we have the right to hire and fire our lawmakers. My late father, in the last analysis, was prepared to volunteer to defend that right with force of arms in 1944. I don't want his grandchildren to lose that portion of their inheritance.
If you do have a question in a moment or so, please raise your hand. And then when you are selected, please stand and wait for a microphone to be brought to you. That way, everyone will hear your question. If you are invited to ask a question, state your name, please. And can I ask you to move immediately to a question? We don't want speeches from the floor. And I've already said to Eddie and Daniel, I'm quite happy to interrupt and push you to ask a question. Seriously, ladies and gentlemen, it's courteous to other members of the audience if you give as many people as possible the chance to ask a question. And to repeat what Ollie said, we are filming and live streaming tonight's event, which means that you would be featured on film and online. With Daniel's agreement, with Eddie's agreement, we are going to take a little cluster of questions at a time. Daniel and Eddie won't feel obliged to answer every point that's raised, but we just think we might get through more contributions if we did it that way. So if you'd like to ask a question, please put your hand up now. Good. Lady at the front, can we just get the microphone? Can you keep your hand up, please, so we can get a microphone to you? Is there a microphone coming? Thank you. And is there somebody else, just to indicate? There's somebody at the back, so we'll come to you in a minute. Okay, please just speak, and if you hold the microphone up close.
Hello, my name's Luciana. I graduated 2 years ago, a degree in history and German. I also speak French, and I've lived in Switzerland, so I've seen things from 2 different angles. My question is how, what your response would be on both sides to maintaining the EHIC agreement we have, the reciprocal health agreement we have, and also I think something that's particularly relevant to students here is the Erasmus scheme. That's exclusively funded by the EU. It's something I benefited from, and I think that many people here will benefit or have benefited from, and I'd like to know how, particularly from the Leave side, if you don't mind, how you would see us going forward with that if we left the EU.
Thank you. There's 2 questions I'll take right at the back. I can see 2 people signalling, so we'll take those 2, and then we'll ask for a first response. Can we get a microphone, Sam, to the person at the back? And then somebody else. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Faye, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher here. And my question is really for Daniel to ask that given you're an MEP, And you're in a unique position to argue things that will help to benefit the UK in a way that we maybe can't because we're not in that position. Why are you trying to leave an area that you can influence very uniquely?
Thank you. And if you can just pass the question to the microphone to the person with the hand at the back, just with their finger up, I think I can see. That's it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jake. I'm postgrad modern history. Again to Daniel, but open to both. In 1975, you said we had a 3-day working week, and now you say we're the 5th largest economy in the world. Do you not think the EU has had anything to do with that at all? Seems a bit strange that it wouldn't.
Okay, Daniel, would you like to... Daniel, if you'd like to begin,
Yes.
and then Eddie.
I'll run through those in order because they were all very good questions. Luciano, first of all. 4 months ago, I was lying in a hospital bed in Switzerland with a face that looked like a smashed tomato, having attempted a jump on a ski slope that I shouldn't have attempted. And the Swiss are very efficient. I was incredibly well treated. I mean, you know, if you've lived there, it's by far the cleanest and best run and most efficient and happiest country in Europe, and richest, by the way, so plainly some kind of miserable life is possible outside the EU. They're also very good at claiming money. And when they came round and said, where's your EHIC card? And I said, well, my wife's got it. And they said, tell her to take a photo of it and text it to you. And that was that. Now, Switzerland is not in the European Union, and that carried on. A really important point. The day we leave will look just like the day before, but that's the day that we can start to diverge. So all of the reciprocal deals on things like healthcare will be in place until one side or the other chooses not to be part of them. Now, obviously, it will be for a future British government to decide whether to remain part of the EHIC scheme. There is an argument, for what it's worth, that we are doing much less well out of it. We pay about 7 times as much to EU nationals in the UK as we benefit in exchange, but I think that most potential future governments will want to keep it. I've never heard any politician in any mainstream party saying that they wouldn't. And I think that also applies to Erasmus, which, as you know, applies to Norway, to Canada, to Israel, to all sorts of non-EU countries. It would be for us to decide whether or not to remain in it. Faye asked whether I'm in a unique position to influence things. I mean, let me give you a very recent example of this. There's a proposal going through the EU at the moment to regulate commercial ports. Okay? Now, British ports are in a very different situation from continental ports. They're private, they are small, they're thickly dotted along our coasts, and they compete with each other. Okay? There is a massively intrusive piece of regulation that would force every port to have competition, more than one internal supplier for its bunkering and its towing and so on, which might make sense in Rotterdam or Antwerp or one of these giant ports. Even there, I'm not sure what it's got to do with the EU, but everyone agrees that it's bad news for British ports. All the port owners are against it, all the trade unions are against it. Every single British MEP voted against the proposal. Every British MEP had previously voted for an amendment to exempt small privately owned ports, right? The Greens, the Labour, everyone. And yet, it went through anyway. And this leads us to the basic problem. Okay? Having a minority input in decisions in Brussels doesn't make it democratic. Democracy isn't just about a periodic right to put a cross on a ballot paper. Democracy also depends on a relationship between government and governed, a relationship between the people who pass the law and the people who are expected to obey the law. We have to feel some identity, some community of interest. Now, a few people may feel, as Eddie does, that we are European in the same sense that somebody could feel Swedish or Hungarian or Portuguese. But I don't think most people do. I certainly don't feel that I'm part of a cultural continuum that includes, Finland and Bulgaria, but that doesn't include New Zealand or Canada. And I think I'm in the majority, although we'll find out in due course whether people really do see Europe as their nationality. And that's the problem. There isn't a European demos. There isn't a European people, a unit with which we identify when we use the word we. And if you take the demos out of democracy, then you're left with the kratos, you're left with the power of a system that has to compel by force what it can't ask in the name of patriotism. And finally, very quickly, yes, of course, we're better off than we were in 1975. The countries that have done best in Europe are Norway and Switzerland that didn't join at all. The countries that are one stage down from that are the countries like Britain, Sweden, and Denmark that stayed out of the euro. The countries that are stagnating are the ones that have gone deepest into the whole thing, and especially those countries in the Mediterranean that are suffering immiseration because Eurocrats won't admit that the single currency was a mistake. So the lesson that I infer from that record is if we take back control, if we tailor our policies to suit our own needs, we will prosper. And by the way, so will all of the other countries, because they also will be freer to make their own decisions.
Thank you. Eddie?
I'll go backwards in order. Just on the economic situation, I mentioned the governor of the Bank of England, a Canadian man, so not one trying to be partisan, but he does say we will go into recession if we come out. If we're talking about the economic situation, I think we're in a better situation, but if we come out, we will get into a worse situation. The World Trade Organization, the IMF, the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, the Director General there, she said it would be very bad for us financially. So I just think it's a leap in the dark. We don't know what we're going to be able to do and have to do. We have to come up with new agreements if we come out of Europe. If we go to the Erasmus and the EHIC agreements, and Daniel's saying it will be up to us to decide whether we come out of those. But I think Switzerland applied to come in. I think Canada must have applied to come in. I don't think the people of Europe are going to be very happy if we come out, because it will logically make it a more unstable situation. So they're not going to be wildly happy to say, yes, you can keep all the benefits that you have when you were within without any problem at all. I think these will get into a problematic situation. So I think these could well go. They could just try and say, well, if you're going to pull out, then you're not going to get these agreements. You won't get the £1 billion that is put in under the Erasmus agreement, which means that you can go around and go anywhere in Europe and do your education, your further education. The middle question, that was sort of more for Daniel. And yeah, I feel if we're going to change the situation, it's above all these arguments, I go again to humanity. It's what we do as human beings. The question that you mentioned, that no one goes around saying European, no one went around saying they were British when they first came out with that. I think King James, back in the 1600s, then you go into the 1700s, we had to put the idea forward. And so it took a slow time to come on and to have people think in that way. But I say African-American, Italian-American, Asian-American, I'm just trying to do leadership here. I'm trying to do a positive view, future of the world. Surely we've got to be heading towards a world where everyone has a fair chance. We've started trying to do it in Europe. It's difficult, it's too bureaucratic, but to change it, we have to be inside it to change it, rather than just running away from it.
Thank you very much. There was a person, I think, with her hand up there. Yes, Sam, I think, if you're there. And there's one person over here, just down the side. Okay, so if we take the first question. Yes, sir, thank you.
Hello, I'm Alex, and I study chemistry here. And I was just wondering, we are a big power in Europe, and we're one of the biggest economies in the world. And if we do leave, how are we going to be able to help out the smaller countries and economies? Are we still going to do anything for them? Because we can't just leave them to struggle.
Thank you very much. And the question here, I think someone's got the microphone now, if you'd like to stand up.
Just picking up on something Daniel said at the end, he talked about his grandfather, or his father, fighting in the Second World War against, for this nation. And I'm concerned about the Brexiteers and the nationalistic tone to a lot of their arguments. Wasn't the Second World War fought against nationalism and sentimentality coming from Nazi Germany? And isn't Europe trying to transcend that nationalism and make us into European and world citizens? So I just wondered what... If you're somebody who felt that some of Daniel's arguments had some kind of weight, what about that concern about it opening the door to the far right and xenophobia?
Thank you very much. We've got a question here, and then there's one at the front, and then we'll have an opportunity for Daniel and Eddie to answer. Please.
Hi, thank you. My question goes to Daniel, and is social, economical answer I'm expecting on this. You compared England to countries such as Switzerland and Norway, and on the other side of the continent to countries such as China and India. But do you think if England would become independent, what's the social situation going to be left like? I mean, Switzerland and Norway has a population of under 10 million. England has a population of 80 million. Then on the other side, China and India has very big population, and I think the social inequality is tremendous. So where do you think England stands in relationship with these two?
Thank you very much. And we've got one more question here. The microphone's coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Claire. I was interested in your observations about the growth economies in the world, being India and China. My concern is if we leave the EU, we become a tiny player compared with the EU market, and I fail to see how we can attract new trade deals from those big nations, and that's a real worry.
Thank you very much. Eddie, do you want to kick off by a response?
Yes. How will we be able to help the smaller countries if we leave? I can understand the argument from the leave side that says if we leave, we don't have to help the smaller countries. Some people would say, well, we don't want to help the smaller countries. I believe it is a positive thing. It goes back to my thing on humanity. Why are we here on Earth if we're not trying to make everyone have a decent life? I think this is something I've worked out. It sounds like a neat little phrase, but I think it's true. I think despair is the fuel of terrorism and hope is the fuel of civilization. And we've got to be putting more hope into the world than despair. And yes, we've got a country that's good, it's powerful, it's got a good economy. We are net contributors into the EU, but I think we get more out of it. But if all these other countries, they get up they get up and stand up strong and they can get their economies going, I think that's better for them, better for Europe, better for the world. Better if the respect is handed around the world. The Arab Spring revolutions, they talked about a dignity deficit. If everyone can get enough dignity around the world, then this world will be a great place to live. And I think this is the key century where we have to make it work. So I do believe that we should be going out, and we are net contributors, but I think we get more back from it, from trade and from jobs. But it's good to be helping other people. There's some, I think that's a positive thing in life. So that's talking on that one. Daniel's father fought in the Second World War. That is a very positive thing.
Not to this audience, but or at least not to all of them.
Well, no, it depends what comes out of it, because I can see that the story, I see how you put it forward. I wanted to be in the paratroops or the Marines and then get into Special Forces. This was one of my plans. Instead, I decided to do the personal version of Special Forces when I walked out the door as a transgender man 31 years ago. It was a very difficult fight. I've done these kind of fighting. I tour in French, I tour in German, I played Hollywood Bowl, I was a street performer. I've made that my fight, but I cannot compete with, I can't, what the veterans did was an amazing thing. And in tribute to that, that's just why I do my 333 gigs. They were designed, I do 3 shows in 3 languages in 3 hours. I designed it to do at the 70th anniversary of D-Day as a commemoration, and I was going to do it in French and English on the beaches, in Caen, which is in Normandy. And I'm going to do it on this 6th of June as well. And I thought, I'll do it in French and English. And those are the sides, on the Allied side, those are the languages being fought in the Battle of Normandy when people landed. And I was in Berlin at the time, and I was doing my shows in German. And I thought, no, I'll add German to it. And then it will be for everyone who fought for democracy and freedom in World War II and since World War II, to include Germany back in. Because Hitler, I feel, kidnapped a country. But I think it's positive if we're trying to do things since World War II, which is basically what the European Union was set up for. We're trying to do things that makes it so we can never go back there ever again. There has been only one war in Europe since then. That was the former Yugoslavia. And since then, every country from there, including Serbia, has said, please, can we join the EU? It is a good force for change. It's difficult. It's too bureaucratic. I totally agree with that. But no one's ever tried to do this before, so we should be trying to do it. If England becomes independent, how will we do socially? Yes, I think it's great going abroad. just in the terms of comedy, I'm now playing in English and French and German and Spanish. The French are now performing in English, the Germans are performing in English, the Italians. That's never happened before. I think that's a beautiful thing. So I think it is good for us to stay in from that point of view. And China and India, I must agree with you, they are huge economies. And you said that China's grown very quickly, and India. But if we had just become Britain, and surely be our exit, Brexit, be our exit means be our breakup, because surely Nicola Sturgeon, she won't immediately go for it, but she'll be looking for another referendum, and then Scotland says they want to be part of the European Union. So that's the end of the United Kingdom as well. So I just think we should stay in and try and make it work. We have to work like crazy to make it work. It's not easy, but I just don't think pulling out is the right way.
Thank you.
Daniel.
So Alex says it's a good thing to help other countries, right? I mean, again, who's arguing against this? Who thinks it's a bad idea to be engaged positively with friends and allies on every continent? Right? As long as we're in the EU, we are paying a great deal more to wealthy French farmers than we are to poor African farmers. As long as we're in the EU, we are applying a protectionist trade barrier, not only to Africa, although Africa is worst hit by it, but to all developing countries, in a way that both impoverishes producers in those countries and impoverishes the poorest consumers in Europe, because their food prices are hiked by the Common Agricultural Policy, and the lower your budget, the higher the percentage of it that goes on food. As long as we're in the EU, we're part of a system where these giant corporations get to set the rules in a way that suits them and hurts their rivals. It's no surprise that the people pouring money into the Remain campaign are Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley and Citibank and all of the people who have spent years creating a regulatory regime that raises barriers to entry and tilts the playing field against either the startup or the innovator or indeed the consumer. And now you say that it's immoral to try and replace that with a better system? No, I don't think freedom, democracy, and autonomy are immoral things. I think we have to bear in mind the distinction between the fantasy EU, the idealized EU that is all about peace and collaboration and so on, and the actual one that has taken shape under our noses, which has become a racket whereby the people lucky enough to be in the system are able to compel tribute from everybody else. As far as World War II goes, the point I was making was about the defense of democracy, the defense of our right to live under our own laws through people that we can hire and fire. And that was an international effort. It was particularly an effort where Britain was supported, as it had been in the First World War, by friends and allies from every corner of the world. There was virtually not an English-speaking country that wasn't involved in the defeat of Nazism. The numbers are awesome. 2.5 million people just from British India, the largest ever volunteer army in the history of warfare. Every single one of them a volunteer, right? There was no conscription in India, because they felt that our values were better than the enemy's, and you know what? They were right. I am very glad that we won the Second World War, and indeed that we won the Cold War, because it means that freedom, liberal democracy, the elevation of the individual above the state, the idea that the rulers don't get to make up the rules as they go along, have now become mainstream values. And I don't think there is anything nationalistic, bigoted, xenophobic about celebrating the fact that we've created a system where power has passed from remote elites to the general population. To come back, my criticism of the EU is not that it involves working with our neighbors, right? I've lived and worked all over the continent. I speak French, I speak Spanish, I'm very happy and familiar with other places. My problem with it is that it's become an oligarchy. It's become an extractive system. It's no longer responsive to the people it's supposed to work for. And it's been captured by some very large corporations and vested interests. The third question, being compared to, would it be like Norway, would it be like Switzerland? I mean, of course, we're not going to be like any other country exactly. We're often asked this in the referendum. If we leave, what would be the deal? Would it be Iceland? Would it be Canada? Would it be Guernsey? I mean, the fact that you're asking the question in that way shows that no two other countries have identical deals with the EU. So, of course, we're not going to precisely mimic any of them. We'll have our own deal tailored to suit our own conditions and needs. The only point about Norway, Switzerland, Guernsey, and all the rest of them is that they have tariff-free access to the EU. So the one thing that they all have in common is that they are part of a free trade area, and that's the one thing I think we can take for granted. What we do beyond that, how far in, what bits we choose to keep, well, that would be for a democratic government to negotiate. But I would just make this point. There are 193 states and territories represented at the United Nations. 165 of them are not in the European Union. A lot of those countries are doing very well. Norway and Switzerland are the richest countries in the world. Norway, Switzerland, and Australia are the three countries with the happiest, they come top of the happiness metrics of the United Nations in terms of longevity, literacy, infant mortality, and so on. Right? So plainly, you can flourish outside the EU, but why is it that here, uniquely, we are expected to apologize for wanting to make our own legislation? Why is it that we have to kind of prove that it's not based on bigotry or isolationism or nostalgia? Right? You know, nowhere else do people think that you need to excuse yourself because you want to hire your own parliamentarians. You know, New Zealand is not about to join Australia. And people don't go around saying, oh, these Australo-skeptics, when are they going to understand that they're just a small offshore island clinging to 19th century notions of sovereignty? You know, Japan is not applying to join China, as far as I'm aware. And people don't say, oh, these bigoted Sino-skeptics, when are they going to get it through their heads that they've lost their empire? It is a natural, healthy thing for a democracy to live under its own legislation while trading and cooperating with its friends and allies on every continent. Final question from Claire about, you know, are we too small to make? Well, I've never really got the idea that we're a small island. I mean, in what sense are we small? Global reach? Size of economy? Geography? I mean, there's how many million islands in the world? What's a bigger island? More, you know, Sumatra? Borneo? I mean, who are the big, powerful, influential islands? We are the 5th largest economy in the world. But for what it's worth, the countries with the most successful trade policies are outside the European Union. It's the Singapores, the Chiles, the Switzerlands that have managed to sign the most extensive free trade agreements. We cannot sign free trade agreements with any other country as long as we're in the EU. Only Brussels controls the commercial policy of the 28 member states. What does that mean? It means we don't even have agreements in place with our closest friends and allies in the Commonwealth. There isn't a free trade agreement between the EU and Australia. Why? Because it's being blocked by some Italian tomato growers. Now, the Italian tomato growers may well be right. I don't know enough about the detail. But how on earth does that mean that we can't have a bilateral FTA with Australia? We thought we had a trade deal between the EU and Canada, but now even that's being blocked because of some unrelated dispute about access for Romanians wanting to get Canadian visas. Now, again, the Romanians may or may not have a decent argument, but how on earth is it to our benefit to make our trade with the growing parts of the world dependent on the agreement of 27 other countries in the one bit of the world that isn't growing? Finally, Eddie said we should stay in to make it work. Well, first of all, I'm tempted to say, well, what do you think we've been doing the last 40 years? I mean, that's our policy ever since we joined, to try and reform the thing. But if you were in any doubt about whether we could carry off a successful reform, a proper overhaul of the thing, look at the recent prime ministerial attempt at a renegotiation. Like 2 years of arguing, crisscrossing the continent, going to every capital, and he comes back with what? Not one power back, not one penny off our contributions, not even a treaty change. And so just ask yourselves one question. Look at how intransigent the EU showed itself to be, how unable or how unwilling to reform, and ask yourselves this. If this is how we were treated now, the second largest net contributor, before we had our referendum on leaving, how would we be treated if we voted to remain? Any idea that we could stay in and then try and reform it, having thrown that card away, it would be laughed at in Brussels, and with good reason.
Thank you. There's somebody at the back there with a hand there, and there's somebody there. I think somebody's already got the microphone. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ellie, and I work in the HR department for the university. We're clearly an organisation that benefits from the migration that happens within Europe. And as somebody who deals with immigration on a daily basis, seeing how people from outside of the EU struggle to come in and either work or study at the university at times, will we not struggle to succeed if we then exclude the rest of Europe within that?
Thank you very much. And there's a question over here, if you'd like to stand up.
So a question for you, Eddie. Daniel said that the leading economies in Europe were countries such as Switzerland, and there is no denying that. It is also true that the economies in the EU but out of the Eurozone are behind these countries, and those in the Eurozone are even worse off. There does seem to be a growing correlation between being in the EU and an economy lacking the ability to grow as much as economies outside of the EU. You keep mentioning humanity in every argument, but is that really enough to compensate for the fact that we are currently unable to compete with these leading economies?
Thank you very much. There's a question here, there's two at the back. Question here, just round at the front, and then we'll get two we'll take at the back, okay?
The name is Chris Morton. My question is to Daniel Hannan. You talk about peace in America and Canada, but the thing maybe you have forgotten is that the only country there that has a border with Russia is Alaska. Do you not consider that we're stronger and better staying in Europe, considering the threat that I believe exists from Putin, or do you think Putin is a pussycat?
Okay, and we've got two questions at the back. First one, Niall.
Yeah, Niall Hamilton. My question's for Eddie. How do you plan on reforming the EU with its limited democratic structures, as most of the decisions made within the EU are from unelected EU commissioners?
Thank you. And there's a question, I think there's somebody with their hand up just beside you, and then we'll go back to our panel. Just the red T-shirt, Hayley, the red T-shirt. That's it.
Hi, my name's Ben, and I'm an undergrad studying computer science here. I just wanted to ask, how will remaining in or leaving the EU affect graduate prospects?
Thank you. I'm going to ask both Daniel and Eddie if they can just try and keep their questions, their answers a little bit shorter, because we'd like to get one more round in after this. So, Daniel.
Okay, well, I'll address only the three that weren't for Eddie. On the first point, Ellie's question about immigration. I think the key thing here is control. It's democratic control. I'm actually a supporter of economic migration. I think this country benefits from the energy and enterprise of people who are prepared to leave friends and family behind and come, and those are exactly the people you want, right? And I think historically we've done very well out of it, and I think we should also, because we are, as Eddie reminds us, human, we should always make space for a component of people who are in need of sanctuary. But it's about control. If I'm going to make those arguments here in my constituency, people are prepared to accept it. All they ask in return is a sense that we are ultimately in charge of roughly who comes in and roughly in what numbers. And as long as we're in the EU, they have no such sense. And I think that there is a real unfairness here to precisely the people that Ellie was speaking about, the non-EU people who are trying to come here and who have suffered from the most extreme crackdown in the visa and migration regime because we have had to free up unlimited space for 500 million EU passport holders. Like every other elected politician, I have constituency cases every week from constituents of Commonwealth backgrounds who now find that, they can't bring relatives over for weddings. I mean, never mind to settle here, just to visit, because we have so viciously cracked down, because there's a practical upper limit to the amount of space, on people who are connected to this country in order to free up space for people who are not. I think that's immoral. I come back to the people who volunteered for us in the two wars when we were most in trouble. Families of those men now can't come in many cases, because they happen not to have the magic EU passport that gets you to the front of the queue. I think that's wrong in terms of ignoring who our friends are. But I also think it makes no economic sense that we are in practice turning away qualified computer engineers, doctors, and so on from Commonwealth countries in order to free up unlimited room for people who may have no qualifications but who happen to hold EU passports. Chris asked about NATO. Asked about Putin and whether I think he's a pussycat. No, I don't. I think he is a despot, an authoritarian, and a tyrant. I'm not suggesting that Britain should withdraw from the NATO alliance. I noticed, though, that there was an interesting approach to Putin taken by Jean-Claude Juncker. He said, we need a European army in order to scare Putin. He said, we won't use it, but it'll scare Putin. Now, I don't know whether Putin's a pussycat, and I'm no expert on the Russian autocrats' nightmares, but I can't imagine that he's kept awake by the prospect of Jean-Claude Juncker saying to NATO, don't worry, guys, we'll take this one from here. I think we are part of a tried transatlantic security system And I think it is dangerous to undermine it or duplicate it with this European army. And then finally, Ben asked about the prospects for graduates. Look, I come back to making this point. You've got to think of the world that people are graduating into now, not the world that I graduated into. Right? I was debating not long ago with Dennis McShane, the former Labour MP, and he said, do you know, Danny, he always calls me Danny for some reason, I don't know why. Do you know, Danny, we sell more to Belgium than we do to the whole of India. And I said, Dennis, that's precisely the problem, right? Which of those two is the better long-term prospect? Now, we've got to think about where future growth and investment is going to be. It's not going to be in the enervated, declining, exhausted Eurozone. We need to raise our eyes to more distant horizons and rediscover our global vocation.
Eddie.
I know I do talk about humanity a lot. I'm sorry, I apologize if I care about humanity, but that's just me, maybe. But again, it overrides everything, surely. It's the thing that you've got to put in at the top. We're trying to get to a place, a world where everyone has a fair chance. And if in the family of Europe, if we're having a problem, do you just walk away and say, okay, this isn't in the right shape, now we're going? I just think, then what's going to happen 10, 20, 50 years later? We're going to come back and we're going to say, no, we're going to get this working. We have to get this working. The economic question, if you discount the governor of the Bank of England, okay, the head of the CBI, the World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, if all of those say it's a bad idea to come out, we're going to go into recession. If you think that's a great idea, then go for Brexit. Vote your heart away. But if you think that they might be talking the truth, they might not have just made that all up, because David Cameron went and said, oh, could you please say this? These are people, independent people, the president of America and Hillary Clinton as well. They've all said it's not a great idea to come out. If you care about your economics, just for young people, the pound in their pocket, if you care about that, and we go into the gentleman talking about graduates, surely there's more opportunities for graduates with the whole of Europe where you can go and you can meet other people and we can learn. Travel broadens the mind. Getting out there, meeting people and learning to live together and work together in some shape or form. That's what we did in the United Kingdom. If we can do it in the United Kingdom, we should be able to do it in Europe. Was it tricky in the United Kingdom? I think it was. Check the history books, but I don't think it was an easy ride to get to here. It still isn't. You know, there's a referendum happening up in Scotland. I fought very hard on that. I went up to Scotland. I said, please don't go. I chose my words very carefully. I didn't say they couldn't go. It was democratic, but I said that. They will leave. We pull out, and then Scotland will go. And there won't be a United Kingdom anymore. But on the economic basis, all these experts from around the world, there are no experts on the Brexit side saying it's a great idea to pull out. And we can come up, as Michael Gove said, we'll be like Albania. And the Prime Minister of Albania said, no, don't be like us. Stay, because we want to be in the European Union. So I do put the humanity above it all. I just think going backwards, putting up frontiers. Tim Peake, when I ran 27 marathons across South Africa, he phoned me up. No, I'm not going for that. But it was a kind of amazing thing, and it blew my mind. But it reminded me, when you look down from space, they don't see borders. I'm not saying get rid of all borders, but we created them. Human beings. We were 10,000 people on this planet 200,000 years ago. Now we're 7 billion. Despair is the fuel of terrorism. Hope is the fuel of civilization. We've got to be heading towards hope. It's difficult. It's hard. But surely that's what we've got to do. As human beings on this planet, that's what the referendum is about.
Thank you very much, Ollie.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have to bring things to a close, I'm afraid. I'm going to ask one more question, and I'd ask both panelists to have just a minute-long answer to bring things to a close. So what does your side need to do in the next month, or a little bit less, to win over those who are still on the fence? We'll start off with Daniel, please.
Okay. Well, since you tee me up and invite so naturally my advert, the first thing that I can do is plug my book, Why Vote Leave, which is exactly what it says on the cover and is available for signing afterwards. I wish I had £9.3 million of taxpayers' money, as the Remain side had, in order to send you all a free copy. But sadly, I haven't, but it is for sale for £10 a copy. Look, I mean, no one is, again, does this really need saying no one is against humanity? That I'm aware. Hands up if you're against humanity. Hands up if you're against hope. Okay, so we're all on the same side, whether you Leave or Remain, okay? We're all in favor of the survival of the human species, and right? Let's take that as common ground. Why do I think that ours is the hopeful side? Well, I'll tell you what I've noticed about this campaign. The Remain guys, it's not just that they're not saying anything positive about Britain. They're not even really saying anything positive about the EU. Everything they say is about the plagues of locusts and frogs that will come the day after we vote to leave. And it becomes beyond parody. We're going to be helping ISIS, we're going to be causing World War III, you know, and I don't know whether the fall in house prices comes before or after the war. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so I think that voting to Remain would be endorsing a campaign based on fear rather than aspiration. It would mean giving in to bullying rather than following our hearts and doing the hopeful thing. And I don't think that's the kind of people we are.
Well, I try not to bully. People scream homophobic abuse at me in the streets, but I try to push back on that because I think that's a more positive thing. I've tried to live my life in an open and positive way. I am on the Remain side, but if this isn't positive, if I'm not living proof that you can do something with your life that's more positive than pulling away, separating, putting up barriers and saying, I'm going, I'm leaving, forget it, forget the rest of you, I don't know what it is. I've tried to do that. I've started from a very low point. I've built up my business. I'm playing all around the world. I'm trying to do something. This is my campaign, Stand Up for Europe, because it's our continent. I don't see it should be taken away. What we've got to do, I think, is put out, and I'm putting out this story from a humanistic point of view, just from this is what we do as human beings. Track it through. The United Kingdom, I come back to it again. We were separate kingdoms. How many wars did we have? And then we gradually came together. It's what we do. If it doesn't work, we need to make it better. We don't run and hide. We stand and fight. We're British people. We stand and fight. We should stand and fight for our place in Europe rather than running and hiding from it. I'm going to stand and fight. I'm going to fight all this way through. And I just want young people to get their voices heard. Older people are all registered. Younger people have got to get registered. If you know younger people, just get them registered. It's their democratic right. And that whole Second World War, surely that was about everyone having democracy and having a fair speech. So get them registered. Let's have a vote, and we'll see where it lands.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been incredibly fortunate tonight to have two excellent exponents, one for the Leave side, one for the Remain side. Please show your appreciation once again to Daniel Hannan and Eddie Izzard.
It's a great pleasure. Good luck. Enjoy the rest of your tour.
Enjoy yours.
It's going to be fun.